Hey, what's up, everybody? This is Ray, and welcome to the RayWenderlich.com podcast. In this podcast, we'll keep you up to date with the latest app development tech talk. Now, here are your hosts, Drew Freeman and Susannah Skyer-Gupta.
Thanks, Ray. This is the RayWenderlich.com podcast. Welcome to episode 8 for season 12. And this episode was recorded on Saturday, the 19th of February, 2022, for release in just a few days on the 23rd of February, 2022. This episode is sponsored by great, high-paying iOS jobs, by which we mean after you get one, remember who helped you come back and sponsor an episode. I'm your host, Drew Freeman, along with my co-host, Susannah Skyer-Gupta.
Thanks, Drew. This episode will talk with Jeff Rames and Leah Marolt Sonnenschein. Jeff is a longtime RayWenderlich.com author and editor who's worked in iOS development for companies of all sizes. He loves helping people get their start in tech and led the RW iOS Bootcamp in 2020. Here at RayWenderlich.com, Leah has written and filmed video courses, tutorials, and worked on book projects. Out in the wider world of tech, she's worked in product management as well as iOS development and is now a founder at Journey, which we'll learn more about soon.
Jeff and Leah, thank you and welcome to the show.
Thank you.
Thank you.
So, our focus today is going to be on constructive advice onto how to get a job in iOS. And before we hit there, I know one of those wonderful ones is networking, which has been sort of our bane over the past 2 years now. How are you folks individually doing with the pandemic and the lockdown? Let's start, Jeff.
Yeah, so as far as networking goes, it's kind of interesting. I think it depends on the individual, but for me, I've actually been more involved, I think, in the community than prior because of the fact that there's so many events now that are virtual. Things like iOS Dev Happy Hours, a monthly event that now started at the beginning of the pandemic and gives people a chance to get together, and a lot of conferences and meetups that have gone virtual. So in addition to the baseline stuff of chats like the RW Discord and Twitter, now there's also a lot of virtual events that I can go to without having to do any travel or added expenses. So overall, yeah, for networking, it's been pretty good. Of course, different than in person, but definitely more stuff available.
Leah?
Yeah, I think, I'd have to agree with Jeff. It's been quite nice to see all these different events pop up, to even host some of networking events myself. But the nice thing about the whole thing is that now you get to network with a much wider possibility of people, because before you were kind of limited to your physical surroundings, so wherever you lived, and now it's like, oh, globally I can network, depending on the time zone. But I found that I've actually been more involved in terms of like making connections, professional connections, over the past couple of years during the pandemic, and potentially even better connections that kind of stick, because when you were in person, you could meet people, but then you still have to look them up on XYZ, or you have to exchange some sort of form to connect later. And now that's like the first thing you do, and then you can just focus on the conversation with them, like, can I get your details? So yeah, I think it's actually been quite good for networking in the professional sense.
Yeah, I've been attending Ray Fix's, the Flock of Swifts is a Swift sit-in in Los Angeles. I'm based in Pittsburgh, and as long as I can hit the time zone correctly, it's wonderful to talk to so many wonderful experts in Swift and the like.
I thought that's a really interesting observation, Leah, too, that how the conversation has flipped. And when you do the like, let me get your details up front, and then that's become normalized. So if that's an anxiety producing thing for you, that's okay, because now we all do that up front, and that's cool, and then you've got that precious thing and can just talk. Jeff, I've got to ask you to reflect a little on the pandemic beyond the huge positive of the online networking. I see you as a person who is very honest and open and real about parenting as a tech professional during this time. So how's it? So for folks who aren't following Jeff on Twitter, we'll share his handle later on. But he's a great voice if you're somebody with a family with school age kids. Like you're not the only person out there on Twitter. There are other people in tech like that. So how's it feeling now?
Yeah, I mean, it's been a roller coaster ride, of course, and it depends on the individual, what their circumstances are. I am super fortunate in that I have a job where I can work from home. My wife also kind of works part time from home, and so things like the fact that in 2020 our kids were doing remote learning or had the option to do remote learning, we were able to take advantage of that. It was definitely stressful. They didn't it's not great for really young kids to be kind of pulled out of that situation where they get to socialize, and was a lot of stress early on, with that year. And then I'd say, this year, things have also been a little rocky because you have the situation now where kids are back in school for the most part. But depending on where you live, I live in Texas, and there's considerable pushback on trying to do like basic safety, like requiring masks, for instance. So that's been a huge stress for me as the school year was starting, and the fact that there was pretty high community spread, and like, hey, a grade school is a great place to pass around germs, right? And so there were some early scares where one of the kids got sick with something. And so we had to kind of like lock down our house and go into like a little bit mini emergency mode. So it's been very stressful, basically. And, as things wax and wane, you always kind of are concerned about what's going on and there's no real great guidance on how to manage things. So I definitely think if without this position of being able to like work from home, just picturing someone who needs to go into the office and then all of a sudden their kid has to be home for a week or two, the amount of stress there would just be just crazy. So it's been difficult. Definitely an added stress on top of everything else.
I think maybe that just speaks to the importance of having these remote opportunities and helping other people find the remote opportunities, the remote support, but also how you can set yourself up to have your livelihood be something you can log into and do from home, where you can make a cup of tea or bring some soup if you need to.
Yep, absolutely. And that was kind of, I think, a little bit of what was behind when we did the boot camp, the RW boot camp in 2020, because we were looking at the fact that, I mean, not only was the pandemic going on, but like, yeah, there were, economic impacts, and people were out of work. And the idea of being able to take somebody who was working in an office by necessity and maybe also out of work, and sort of like set them up so they can have one of these awesome situations like the other like iOS developers. And it's just that was a really big motivator there, and something I'd love to see more of.
So we're going to be talking about some specifics on how to get a job in this amazing field. What leads you guys, each of you, to be keen to like, how did you gain expertise in seeking iOS jobs, and why do you care about helping other people in that? Leah, what brings you to this topic?
Yeah, I think, for me, it kind of all started back in college when I got spooked in, I think, my second year of college, by some of the seniors telling me, like, you're not going to get a job unless you have an internship, or unless you have a great resume, unless you know how to interview. And at that point, I got into my head, okay, I need to get on my game. And so at that point, I started doing a lot of research for myself on how do you get into like programming jobs, what do you have to do, what do you have to say, what kind of internships are there that then open doors, etc. How do you behave? So there's a lot of these like tricks that you can do and practice interviewing. Like interviewing itself is this skill that you can't just, I mean, it should be that you could just walk into an interview and just, show your skill somehow, but it doesn't work that way. Similar with the SATs, I would say.
Mm.
But it really started at that point, and then I understood that you had to do a lot of project-based work. So I started a group at my college called Grinnell App Dev, where we were making apps for the college. And the idea was that like you could join and you would be learning as well as creating apps. So we would be training younger classmen, upperclassmen would training younger classmen, and it would be kind of like creating your portfolio for later down the line, as well
Oh,
as
that's
like you would
wonderful.
practice for interviewing. Yeah, it was quite cool. And the college was really nice, Grinnell College, because they actually financially supported us. So they gave us $150,000 to run this as a pilot project for 3 years, where we were also able to pay the students to develop the apps because they were beneficial to the college. So it was like a really awesome experience for me. And that's where I really started like understanding how you interview, how important it is to have certain, ducks in a row before you can even apply, how to do networking and things like that. And yeah, that's when things started. And then I kept on being kind of involved in mentoring and helping people. So I taught some classes at General Assembly for iOS, like a really prolonged boot camp. So one of the things that we did there was also prepare the students to interview, and they were kind of ranging from different ages. So either like they were college students, but they were also up to like 50 years old. And obviously, of course, as an interviewer myself, I've been part of putting together an interview process. I've been through many interviews, so I have a lot of opinions on on the topic. But yeah, there were what was really clear to me was that interviewing is a bit broken. But even though it is a broken process, like at least if I can kind of like help people with the lessons that I've learned from going through the process and helping others do it, at least I can help them get that leg up to navigate the process. So during the pandemic, like similar time as Jeff was running the boot camp, I think I did a session there as well. But I also wrote an article called Navigating the iOS Interview. So at that point, I really like delved into all of the bits and pieces and tried to consolidate everything into a long article with a lot of practical resources. Yeah.
I find it interesting that obviously universities have internships for their students, but you don't see a lot of practical interviewing classes. And I've always wondered why universities don't bother with that one, because it seems like it is as necessary as balancing a budget would be for K through 12.
Yeah. I would actually say, like, yes, we did have this professional services department or something like that was supposed to help us with like resumes, interviewing, etc. But I think that they're quite old-fashioned in the approach that they had. Like they would tell you how to dress for your interview, and they would tell you, to format your resume in a way that seemed like the most appropriate. But like what actually ends up working is your resume needs to stand out in some way. It can't be just the same as everyone else. And probably sending a resume out there in the wild is not going to work. Like what's going to work is like you making personal connections or reaching out to someone yourself, and making that connection happen. Like, being on the side of people who see how a recruiter actually goes through resumes and what ends up before like a hiring manager, you see that it really doesn't work. For example, I had so my first job was working as an iOS engineer at a company called Rent the Runway in New York.
Oh, wow.
And
That was your first job?
yeah.
I'm so impressed with that job just because I think Rent the Runway is such an amazing concept. So I always think of that when I think about you. So what a
It
cool
was quite
first
cool. Yeah.
gig.
It was amazing. I'm really thankful for it. Yeah, definitely. But we were looking for a senior iOS engineer at the time, and we weren't getting great candidates through the pipeline. But then this girl reaches out to me on LinkedIn, and she's like, "Hey, I just did this like Flatiron iOS bootcamp. I really love Rent to Runway. It seems like you're doing iOS. I'd love to learn more." And I'm just like so surprised because I haven't seen many women apply. And she wasn't really applying. She was just kind of like, reaching out to see
Just
what it's
chatting.
like to be working on this. I was like, yeah, sure. Happy to chat. I'm also like, generally, I consider myself a helpful person. If I can make the time, I probably will. Um, so I reach out, we have a chat. At the end, she like really nicely kind of asked like, "Hey, are you looking for anyone?" And I'm like, "Sure, I'd love to introduce you to my boss." So we take her out to lunch after a couple of weeks, and we ended up hiring her.
So did
despite the
she
fact
become the junior and then you
she
became
became
the
a
senior?
she became a junior as engineer. We just didn't really get a senior one at that point. We decided to delay that hire, but she was so impressive with like how fast she learned and how she approached things that we're like, you know what? We believe that she can really grow very quickly here, tremendously. And the people we were seeing just didn't have that type of a character. So that was a very different approach. And like she would never have gotten in any other way because her resume just wouldn't have said like,
Right.
I can do iOS. Yeah.
I feel this is as much a conversation about how you should dare to put yourself forward and reach out as it is if you're a hiring manager listening, thinking about who might work great in your team. Because if somebody is a fast learner and is passionate about the product, that goes such a long way.
Oh yeah.
So I want to step back for a second and learn more about why Jeff is keen to contribute to this conversation about his experiences in iOS job search and in hiring.
Sure. Yeah. So motivation wise, I think that, it really resonated with me when Drew was talking about the fact that, in college, they don't really give you any kind of course on how to prepare for interviews, and how to go about a job search. I do kind of remember having like this little maybe 10-page pamphlet that I was given that, like Leah was saying, tells you how to dress and make sure you write a thank you note to your interviewers, things like that. But I actually benefited quite a bit from the fact that my father was an HR professional, for his
Oh,
career, and so I always had uh, that extra boost and the assistance of someone being able to tell me like how to write a resume and like the right ways to go about applying and how to engage with a recruiter. Granted, some of this was a little old school, because of his background and things like that, but I definitely had, I think, like a head start on the ways to go about it, right? And so between that and the fact that I got my career was pretty well established by the time, the iOS jobs were a thing, or by the time iOS existed. I had, I think, a little bit of an easier time getting in, uh, just because of timing and all those advantages. And so I think from my perspective, a lot of it is like, well, I tend to want to get back, right? And so I recognize, I can see how difficult it is, because of the fact that, especially, I mean, not only from my firsthand experiences, but the fact that I did the boot camp, but I also do a lot of other things like that, some of which comes about through, just being associated with RayWenderlich.com, but also some other orgs I volunteer with. So I work with a lot of people trying to get into tech, and I can see how much struggle they go through, right? And you hear the stories about people submitting hundreds of resumes and getting like
yes.
one or two calls back, right? Uh, and I know I don't always know exactly how to put myself in their shoes, but I've been trying more and more to do that. And I want to basically take all the stuff that I know and the experiences I've had and be able to help get them through that painful thing. Because at the end of the day, I hate the job search thing, right? It's nobody likes going through a tech interview. They're just brutal, and a job search in general, and trying to find something that is actually a job that you're going to enjoy is an even bigger challenge, possibly. Uh, so it's something that just, yeah, is really top of mind, and some way that I feel like I can directly give back. And frankly, like, I get a lot of questions about it. People ask me to review their resume, or ask them if this posting is something that's worth them pursuing, and that type of thing. So yeah, I think it's just kind of all those things sort of drove my motivation towards wanting to help people out with job searches. Uh, and then I'm trying to remember what the rest of your question was, Susanna.
No, I think that there's lots
Okay.
of places we can jump off from
I was
there.
actually rather amused by you saying, what is this job listing saying? Because inevitably, I think every iOS job listing says must have 8 years of X code. And you all just sit there going, yes, I drive a car, must have gas. Thank you. So let's talk about the resumes for a moment, because I think we've all said that they need to stand out, but they need to also get into the proper hands. And these are two very different talents. Um, Somebody once told me that to make a resume stand out, it depends on what the first 6 lines say and what the last 6 lines say. Because somebody will grab your resume, they'll look at it, they'll page to the very end and see what it says there. And I know this because my last couple of lines say available by request, salary, benefit expectations, professional references, humorous anecdotes, and bad vocal impressions. And on more interviews than I can count, they've actually brought up the bad vocal impressions, which means somebody has actually looked at the last page of my resume.
I can't believe you have more than one page.
I'm in the industry 35 years. I've always believed that it's 1 page per 10 years.
Oh.
Yeah, that's generally, I try to, if at all possible, you want to go for 1 page, but I definitely think there's something to the fact, if you have a bunch of experience that is relevant to what you're applying to, like, yeah, going beyond a page is okay if you've got, like a couple decades plus.
Yeah, at this point, it's it's broken up into the concept of the first page and a half is the relevant experience. Then I get into here is the list of buzzwords, just for your HR scanners to hit the buzzwords. Then I get very sneaky and I have another section of buzzwords that say, these are technologies I have no experience in. Please don't hire me for. And another list of buzzwords. And I'm very good at now editing out the number of automated things that I get on the basis of, did you actually read my resume?
So you have like a white list and a black list on your resume.
Yeah.
But probably the HR scanners are looking at the blacklist as well and thinking that you're appropriate for that. Is that not?
It is absolutely true. I have gotten more .NET development offers than I really want. But I mean, nonetheless, I don't know. I've kept the same resume now for about 10 years with just the little tweaks every job. And and Indeed and other sites like that are constantly filling my bucket.
Yeah, and I think I was gonna say, I think there's like different approaches that are relevant depending on where you are in your career, right? Because if you're like brand new to tech or brand new to development, you're gonna want, it's a lot more important what your resume looks like and how easily it's scanned by one of those systems, right? Whereas if you're more like, if you're further along in your career, you're more senior, you're going to be able to essentially, like, usually you're going to go through like people in your network, get direct referrals, or recruiters are going to reach out to you. A lot of the time, your resume is just like a formality where
Yeah.
they've already looked at your stuff on LinkedIn, or they just kind of know about you, and then the recruiter needs the resume on file or whatever. So it's a little bit of a different take, different. I guess the stakes are higher depending on where you are in your career as far as like how your resume is formatted.
Okay, so what if you are new? So it sounds like for people just coming out of a boot camp or just coming out of school or just, trying to get into this, maybe even without that experience, what should that person's resume look like? How do they pass the automated scan and actually end up in front of a human who might then email them?
I think, Susanna, what I would give as advice to that person is to not try to game the scanners because they're not going to make it through. So instead, try to go through people. That would be my biggest advice, to try to find alumni from your college, to try to find like second degree connections on LinkedIn. Like, definitely make a LinkedIn to start off with. Even though that might not be the place where developers hang out at the beginning, it is definitely where, hiring managers and recruiters hang out. So make a LinkedIn, see who works at the companies that you work at, stalk them a little bit on Twitter and other profiles, reach out to them either on a Twitter DM or on LinkedIn with something recent that they talked about and you liked, to make a personal connection, and just like reach out, maybe not even think about like looking for a job, to start building your network and hopefully build it out before you absolutely need the job. Talk to these people, see how it's like to work there, and then bring it up, like similar to how that girl who who messaged me did it. I think that could work the best way. And one other thing I also always mention to college students who are asking for advice, because I do often go back and speak as an alumni to Grinnell College at
Excellent.
things like that. So I tell them, like, people want to help students. Like, they really want to help them because they were in that position at some point. So while you're a student, you will that's the time when you'll most likely get help from someone, because they feel the pressure. And if they were at the same college or the same school, like even more so. But the one thing that none of these students ever think about is the fact that there are referral bonuses that exist at most companies. So really, it's not that you're just, they're doing you a favor. You're also potentially doing them a favor because they might get a referral bonus for you. So don't think about it as like, oh, this, person is doing, such a huge thing for me. You could also be doing a thing for them. So it goes both ways.
That's a really good point about how it can be mutually beneficial if you end up working at the contacts company. So Jeff, what do you tell newbies, especially like the people coming out of the boot camp that you worked with? What should they do to their resume to shine?
So I think probably like the top things that I would recommend, one for sure is like keep it to a page and focus on, another big thing I think is that you should try to tailor it, or you should definitely tailor it to any specific job that you're applying to, because typically, like, you're going to have some experiences that are a little more relevant to a particular company than others. And so pushing that bullet point up to the top is going to be a good advantage. And so, like, for instance, I have like 3 different template versions of my resume that are kind of towards different things I might be interested in if I'm in the middle of a job search, and even beyond that, I'll tweak those a little bit. And then I think another thing I typically like is to have a really concise summary at the top that sort of explains who you are, but also especially focuses on what you have to offer. And so, because that's, you're looking at people potentially that are just like going through a huge list of resumes and like spending just a few seconds on each one, right? So that's the first thing they're going to read. And so you want that to be compelling enough that they want to look a little further. And then beyond that, for people that are brand new, I think one of the more important things, more than what you actually put on the resume, is the work you have to do to get things to put on there. So, of course, this is depends on people's individual circumstances. But if you want to get a job doing iOS development, you need to do some iOS development first. So, really,
Right.
like one of the best things you can do is build an app. Like either throw it up at open source or ideally put it on the store. Just having that is huge because it shows that you understand end to end the process, and you can call out like some of the basic things that you worked on there that are probably going to be relevant to a lot of jobs. Hopefully you kind of tailored the sort of app you did towards the market you're looking to get, the types of jobs you're looking to get. So having
So
that
that
kind of
was going to
experience.
be my right away follow up, and you're starting to answer, which is really interesting because it's not necessarily the answer I have heard from others. So do you think you should look to see like, oh, I might want to work here, I might want to work there, and then plan what kind of app you want to write? So you use your
Uh,
your hoped for sector, or your hoped for actual employer as like,
Not necessarily. Especially when you're starting out, odds are you're not going to be able to be super choosy about exactly which company you want to work at, right? But let's say you have an interest in a specific industry, then that's also something you're interested in building, and it'll be engaging for you to do. So I think like the first thing is it has to be something that's interesting to you, and like truthfully, I mean, a lot of people probably might be into like writing a game. That's a fun thing
right.
to do, right? But that's probably not going to have as much value if you're applying to work on like in the finance industry on a banking app, right? It still shows you have the skills, but if you were to write something, even it doesn't even really matter what the subject matter is, but just like that example of like a Pokemon listing, that just one of those things with like an open API that you can easily consume. And as long as you can show like, hey, I made a network call, I displayed some stuff on a table view, there you go. That's like 90% of most iOS jobs. So
Oh,
ideally, you
you're
just
making it sound so scintillating.
yeah,
There's an
maybe.
old there's an old adage in the theater world: do not audition with a song from the musical you're auditioning from.
Hmm.
And I think that it parallels that idea of, if you are really interested in a company, trying to replicate what they do as an example of your work is going to fall short on the basis of you don't necessarily know how they've architected, how they've engineered, um, and you're basically solving a problem they've already solved. But if you
Mm.
go off and you do something unique to you, it shows off your talents. And that literally is from the theatrical director's point of view, not from an engineering point of view. You want to show off your talents.
Yeah, that
Interesting.
Yeah,
that
plus they might have a lot of opinions about that specific industry and a lot of knowledge. So they'll look at it and be like, I've seen this before. I've seen all the problems. So maybe better not to like tailor it specifically, because just what Jeff said, like you have to be interested in it, because then you'll talk with passion about what you're doing, and that really shines through, and that's what you want.
yeah, and
So what?
I would say anecdotally, so I built a couple of apps that were like personal health related, and those led to like really good discussions and interviews with healthcare companies, because even though I wasn't like doing exactly what they were doing, and like, I mean, I didn't have, it wasn't like some enterprise grade application, but it still led to things like, hey, so did you use HealthKit for this, and what sort
Right.
of issues did you run into here? And it's mostly the fact that it shows you have some interest, because showing passion for the job that you're applying to is super important. And if you spent the time to build apps that are kind of in that industry, I think that's a huge like that's a huge benefit. It gets you kind of in the good graces of people that are chatting with you, and maybe catches a hiring manager's attention.
Yeah, I mean, it's sincere. Like if if you're applying for a bunch in healthcare and you actually don't really care about it, that's not going to be a good match for you even.
Yep.
So,
Anyone.
okay, the very basics, right? Show you can make a network call, show you can do something with the data that's returned. What else is on that list of very basics when you're thinking about, well, what kind of app should I make? What are things that you definitely right now today need to demonstrate you can do?
I just wanted to quickly interject and say that if you want to achieve this basic networking call and show off something, you can definitely try out the Ray Vanderlick app challenge that we put together, and try to replicate the app that we have. Because we have a couple of people who have done it, created a pull request to it, plus the app is entirely open. And then we also have a video of 2 of these apps being submitted and then reviewed by 2 of our great members and what they did well and what they didn't. So it could be a great review.
Thank you. What a great plug. I haven't even looked at that content. That sounds really cool.
Yeah, and so to answer your question, Susanna, I think, I mean, it's a little bit. There's not like a right or wrong answer on this one, but depending on the types of jobs you're looking for, I guess if you're just kind of looking for to cast the widest net possible, then yeah, minimally some sort of networking, because that's in the vast majority of apps you're going to look at. Ideally, some kind of data persistence, because that's another one that you're going to probably use in whatever job you go to. Being able to cache things. Let's see.
Use a table view or collection
Yeah,
view.
yeah, basically, basic UI kit stuff. And honestly, if you're interested in Swift UI, I think that's fine too. I think if you're building like only one app today, I would probably go to UI kit, but this is a whole debate.
I was going to say that's so interesting, and I was certain you were going to say the opposite. So
Yeah, we're kind of.
I mean, there's an interoperability now where you can have a little bit in Swift UI, a little bit in UI kit. So maybe that's the way to go. Like do a little bit of both to show that you can do it.
And to show that you can have them work together. I mean, that
exactly.
Yeah,
that's a huge achievement in its own. I think when I was applying, the question was Objective C plus Swift. Make those work together.
Yeah, that's a good point. But yeah, I think those are really the basic things. Just that you can do some UI stuff. You want to show that you paid some attention to accessibility. Make sure that that's implemented and call that out if you're asked about it. And then beyond that, just
unit tests.
That's a good point too. Yep.
Good point. All right, so you've written this amazing app that does cool things that you care about. How do you turn that into a really great job offer?
So odds are the app itself, it's not like someone's going to see it on the store and hunt you down because you wrote that Pokedex app.
So it's not just a straight talent search. You won't be discovered.
No, probably not. I mean, maybe if you get if you're on the stage at WWDC or something, then you're probably good. But beyond that, it's really just a matter of having that experience on your LinkedIn or on your resume to show that hey, I built an app. So that's the first part, is that maybe that could help get your foot in the door, because especially for that first job, they're definitely looking to see that you can do the work. And if you built something, then that proves that you did. And then the second part of that is that it gives you examples to use when you're in a behavioral interview. And so if they're asking for a difficult bug you encountered, you can definitely pull from some examples from when you were building that application, or if you had to make some technology decision. There's plenty of things that you can reach into that experience to share your knowledge and show that you kind of understand the basics of the job and that you can verbalize it. So I think that's really the biggest part of it, is that it gives you real world experience to reference when you're in those interviews.
That makes
And
sense.
of course,
That
have
really
that
does.
app on your device in case somebody brings that up. You don't want to go searching for an app you built. You want to make sure, if you wrote an app, have private and keep it on your device.
Yeah, have it
Absolutely.
right to hand.
Good point, and have it working. Sometimes you wrote something, and by the time you
Yes.
have the interview, it doesn't work anymore, and you haven't checked it. So check it.
Just be ready to say, "Oh, that's some development build I forgot about when it crashes."
Yes, familiar memories.
So go ahead.
Let's talk a little bit more about interviewing and preparing for interviews. And Leah, you'd said this, and it has been, the point's been made to me maybe by you before, that like interviewing is its own skill, a different thing than being successful in the actual job that you're eventually offered. It's like its own skill set. So how do you build that? Like, how do you get good at interviewing?
Yeah, I think I kind of intuitively knew that, I would say, because I spent a lot of time preparing for interviews or helping other people prepare. But Ash for really said it so nicely to me, like interviewing itself is an art. And it's so true. And like, you can practice your way to perfect your skill as much as you want to. And really, I think what's helpful is, understanding, first of all, like what are the different phases of an interview that you might encounter, and then understanding which one of those you're good at, and then putting those aside and focusing on the ones that you're not so good at, and practicing, because practice makes perfect. So for example, in the article that we wrote, we kind of identified 5 different interview phases. So there's a practical round that's mostly about like showing your skills, either in a pairing interview setting, or like someone sends you a take-home assignment and then you do it. That's quite popular, and that's probably one that I like the most. Then you have the computer science fundamentals, which are probably my least favorite because they put you under a lot of pressure, and they make you do things that aren't really representative of the job that you'll be doing in most cases. But it's, a necessary evil still. Then you have more of like the behavioral interview, which is usually doesn't involve any sort of engineering, and it's more about how do you work in a team? Would you fit into that team? And then we have something that's more like higher level, like design stuff. And then sometimes there's like more framework specific things, or maybe language specific things. So out of these, let's say 5, identify what you're good at. So some people might be really good at the practical ones, some people might be good at behavioral ones. Put those aside, decide what you're not good at, and now decide to practice. And the way that you practice would be with doing a lot of mock interviews with, ideally other people who might be kind souls who will practice with you, or you can do it yourself as well. There are questions for interviews available all over the internet. We collected a bunch of them on a GitHub repository that I'm sure we can put a link to in like the show
we'll
notes
do that
here.
in the show notes.
But if you just Google iOS interview or computer science interview, you'll find a whole bunch of things. So select 5 out of those, and then don't just look at them and think in your head what the answer is going to be. Literally say it out loud and give yourself the 30 minutes to do that. Because even though it feels like, oh yeah, I know this, I can totally do this, once you actually have to perform it, it's an art. You have to perform the interview, and the way you speak and the way you kind of organize your thoughts needs to be very well thought through, and it needs to follow a certain format. So you really want to to practice this and to have your chances to be the best. I would suggest, and I think others as well who help people interview, um, to
I was
record
gonna say
yourself.
there's sites, aren't there? Like, are there places people can go
There are sites, yeah,
to
there are
try
sites.
this? And are there some that are free or affordable? I mean, what if you're really new but want the experience of doing
Mm,
mock interviews,
I
but
don't
you
know.
can't pay for it?
I don't know if there's anything that's free. I think there might be on interviewing.io. I think there might be like a few free trials that you can do. Or there might be a way where like you can do these mocks with like their whole spiel is you can do mocks with people who work at Apple, Google, etc.
Right.
But I think there's a possibility for you to do mocks with people who are practicing to be interviewers themselves. So they
Mm.
wouldn't be like Apple, Google, blah, blah, blah. They would be more your regular type of a programmer. But that's still a good practice, at least when you're starting out. So, but it's really important to know that your thoughts are being communicated coherently. That's what you want. Yeah.
Yeah, and I would add to the question about free sources for doing mock interviews. Another good option is honestly, again, if you're spending time curating your network, there are definitely people out there that are very willing to help. Like we were saying earlier, especially if you're kind of trying to get into the industry, people are really cognizant of how hard that is, and a lot of people are really willing to help. And I occasionally will see people like posting on Twitter, like, hey, if you want to do mock interviews, here's my sign up sheet. And typically, if you ask for in the right places, you're going to find people that are willing to help you out.
For sure. Yeah. I mean, just don't be afraid to reach out to people. I think the iOS community in particular is very friendly,
Yeah.
wants to help each other out. So just reach out. You might, get an interview out of it, but you might also make some really great lifelong friends. So yeah.
So once you've done that, well, actually, let's step back and talk a little bit more about networking. That was when I think you guys have been the most positive interviewees responding to how's the pandemic been. And I don't know if that's because we really do have legitimately positive things to say here in terms of our tech lives, our professional lives, or also because of where we're at now in the pandemic, that maybe we can see things a little more
Yeah.
positively. There's light at the end of this tunnel. But talk more about networking. Like, how do you, again, a lot of this I'm looking at from the standpoint of like, you're new, you don't know, you're not established in the iOS dev community yet. How do you get there? How do you get established? How do you find people to talk to, not just to get a job, but how do you create a supportive community as you're looking for this job?
I mean, I can talk from my personal experience of what was useful, what was helpful, and how I did things. So I felt very thankful to Ray Vanderlick because I used a lot of resources there to build out that app dev group that we had at college. So I ended up going to WWDC as a student, met Ray there in person. I was like, hey, I really want to write for your site. Because now I have a job. I'll have some time to do this, and I really want to give back. So that was kind of my way to both give back to the community, but also kind of establish myself as someone who is involved and knows knows what she's doing in the world of iOS development. So I think like putting yourself out there in terms of adding value to the community is the best way to network and get your name out there, as well as just like for the quality content and for the quality person that you are. So that's how I would approach this. Like if you're, for example, the girl who reached out to me back at Venture Runway, like what she did, because she was really unfamiliar with a lot of topics that we were developing and discussing there, because she had a 3-month training, she decided to kind of dive deep into each of the things that she didn't know, and she wrote a blog post about it. And one of her blog posts like went viral. This was just on Medium, so it wasn't like anything special. She was just writing like once every 2 weeks on Medium about the thing that she found most fascinating that she learned. And one of her posts went like super viral, had like 100,000 views.
Wow.
And it wasn't like a topic I would write about because it was very like I know it. But there are so many people who keep entering the industry who don't know everything, who don't know like a lot of different things, and the way that someone explains it, it's very like it can be very different and hit people differently. So just document your journey, build yourself up in public. Like that would be my best advice for networking. Yeah.
Yeah, and I would say you might be speaking to a biased panel here because we're all both involved heavily in the Ray Wenderlich community. So I have like similar response where I feel like for me personally, the way I think I got the most connections within the community was through my involvement with Ray Wenderlich, because I started that out. I mean, I read Ray's blogs when I was first starting out, and then I joined the team not too long after that. So I've been with the team for like 7 years, I think it is, and
Wow.
and so I know a lot of people through just fellow folks that I've worked with Ray Wenderlich, but also from producing content and engaging with the community around that content. And so to me, that's been the most impactful way for me to kind of get my name out there. And I think because of that, I really believe in what Leia just said, which is, find whatever the correct outlet is for you. For me, I'm a little bit more comfortable like writing. There's going to be people that are great at hosting a podcast. There's going to be people that are good at doing like YouTube videos. But I think just what's important is to realize like no matter where you are in your journey, there's someone that's less experienced than you, as long as you're at least a minute into it. And so you can share whatever you've learned and your unique perspective on something, and that's going to resonate with people. And so I think that's important to kind of like put yourself out there, and then the community kind of starts to appear around you. And then of course there are places like Twitter, like the RW Discord, where you can find a lot of people and talk about those things that you're sharing, and you can find other people on the same journey as you. And so a lot of the times that can build some really good relationships that go on into the future. And so I think that's definitely a big one. And then there definitely are people that are not super involved in the broader community, and that's fine. You can definitely approach a job search from a lot of different ways, but networking is definitely kind of a silver bullet, I think, in terms of trying to find opportunities. It's the difference between that I had to submit 500 resumes before I got a call, and
Right.
somebody who basically, yeah, like the woman who reached out to Leah and was able to make something happen. Like that's the powerful stuff. And I think the more you can get, even if that's out of your comfort zone, the more you can kind of pursue that type of networking, the better off you're going to be. So yeah, I think that's my intake or my input on it.
Yeah, I guess we
Other
should
threads-
also. Sorry, Susannah, I was just gonna say we should mention probably the iOS folks like Slack group here. If people don't know about it, that's a community where you'll find a lot of people who are very active. There are a lot of job postings happening there as well, and you can find a lot of advice that's been answered to many, many different questions in that Slack.
Okay, and we'll make sure we get that added to the show notes. I was going to say, I feel like a common thread that's running through this is be brave. Like the gal who reached out to you after a 3-month boot camp, that was really brave. And just putting yourself out there, and what you're saying about the blog post, which I actually think is really heartening, that like a lot of times when you're newer, you think, I don't have anything useful to say. Yeah, it's all been done. I'm not the foremost expert on a cutting edge technology, so I'll just sit over here quietly. But there's so many people interested in becoming an iOS dev that, what's new to you is also going to be new to somebody else. So that's great encouragement.
And the way that you experience it and the way that you explain it can also be like really your unique selling point that helps a lot of other people that maybe haven't gotten it in any of the different ways that it's currently been explained. And I think one thing we should mention here is also that, this is not going to happen overnight. So it's probably like if you're going to start writing something or doing something where you're trying to, provide value to the community, and get your name out there, like you can't expect it to happen in a day or a week or maybe even a month. It takes like consistent effort over time. But at that point, like if you are consistently doing something like once a week, you do your blog post or YouTube video or Twitter post or something like that. If you do that for like 3 months, I'm sure that you will make a significant amount of progress. If you do it for a year, I'm sure that you will have an even greater significant amount of progress. It's just like, don't expect it to happen immediately, but if you stick to it, you will certainly get results.
I'm glad you talked about the concept of being brave and not being afraid of expressing some of the stuff that you don't know. We've talked on the show many times about when we have somebody talking about a technical topic, we get to play both the experts and the novices. And I remember early on in this series, I was afraid to ask a novice question that I actually didn't know. And one of the people I respected and still respect at Ray Wenderlich came up to me and said, "I'm so glad you asked that question because it's something I've never known and I've just never wanted to ask, because we're in an industry where there is that sense of, oh no, you have to look like you know everything, when in truth, I think you get further if you admit to what you don't know."
And there's always somebody else out there who also doesn't know it.
Yeah.
And that's heartening. So Leah, you brought up something that is, I'm sure tons of people are wondering. So how long does this whole job search process take? What are reasonable expectations you can set for yourself from, okay, so I need a job today. Will I have one later this afternoon? Like it's, by before dinner? What's reasonable?
I think it really depends on like where you are in your career. I think for this podcast, we're focusing more on people who are getting into iOS development, or maybe it's like their first, second, third job, something like that. I would expect 3 to 6 months to get a job that you both get and like. So to get just a job offer, I'm sure you could get it done in 3 months. To get a job offer that you want to take, I would bank like on the 6-month period to get there. Yeah.
Just the general job process of contact to job is typically going to be about a month to a month and a half.
Yeah.
Saying this as somebody who is literally switching jobs this weekend, the entire process took about a month and a half for all of the paperwork and contracts and decisions and everything else to be made there. But that also was the whole history before that we're talking about here, which is the prepping it and finding the contacts and everything else. So yeah, I think 3 to 6 months is is a good thing, and it also depends on how much you reach out.
Yeah, and depends on the company, right? Because like a bigger company is going to move slower, most likely, because they'll have more processes in place. A smaller company or
Right.
startup is probably going to move way faster. Um, but yeah, it really depends how much you reach out at the beginning, um, and how fast the company moves.
So let's say you've lucked out and you've gotten that offer on the table. Talk about the fuzziness of this part of the process, because I think a lot of people are handed a piece of paper saying, here's a number, and they figure, okay, I'm done, I win.
Yeah, that's another one I feel like I had an unfair advantage with early on, just again because of good advice I got from my dad. But I think, yeah, I've been surprised over the years when I bump into someone who maybe just thinks like, okay, I got my offer, hooray, I'm going to sign it now. Like, no, like this is the beginning of negotiation. I mean, and this does, again, like a lot of the questions we've discussed, vary based on where you are in your career. To some extent, there's a little less room for negotiation potentially if you're entry level, but for the most part, they have a range for the positions that they're hiring for that they're willing to pay. They have a whole bunch of different levers to pull. Depending on the type of company, there's, for sure there's going to be salary. There may or may not be an annual bonus sort of cooked in there. There might be RSUs.
You might want to back up and tell people what an RSU is.
Yeah, so restricted stock units. So essentially, basically, as part of your job offer, you may be given the promise of stock in the future. So typically, you'd be given like a set amount that would, over the course of 4 years, typically would vest, so that basically you can take ownership of that stock and sell it if you want. And so that's a big component of a lot of companies' compensation offers, and especially in like big tech. And so you may get like potentially double your salary in RSUs depending on where you are, but it really varies on the company. And then there are other companies where, yeah, you're not getting that, but you're getting like an employee stock purchase plan. It's like an added bonus, but hey, they'll generally give you like a percent off the stock, and the price is set at the beginning of the offering period. But you can also essentially they'll allow you to buy the stock at the lower price of the beginning of the offering period or
Mhm.
the end of the offer period. So essentially, it's like whatever money you put in there, you're going to get 15% back, if it was a 15% discount, and possibly more. So there's things like that, and then of course benefits, which they vary. There's things like PTO. I've heard of people negotiating PTO. I've never actually seen that happen. But yeah, all of those pieces are things that they can tweak, as well as signing bonuses. That's another one, where they might give you some money right when you start, that as long as you stay for a year, you get to keep. And so I think keeping all those pieces in mind, it's very hard to compare apples to apples, and it depends on the size company, if it's public or private. Uh, Equity is another thing I didn't even get into, but like for if you're going to like a funded startup, you may be able to get equity in it, which could ultimately end up with like a big payday if they go public or get acquired, or it could end up being zero. And you have to kind of look at that based on your risk to reward math, your own personal take on that. So I guess my point is, like, the most important thing is to kind of understand that there's all these variables at play, but that you can find resources like Glassdoor and Layers are both sites where you can find information on like the market salary, usually depending on geographic location. And you can use that as a baseline to determine like, okay, is this thing within range? But you got to adjust with all these other variables, right? And then based on that, you probably, if it looks like it's on the lower end of the range, you may want to come back and say, hey, if you can bump it up to this amount, seems a little bit more in line with what the market is showing. And maybe they come back and offer you some more RSUs or something like that. But it's all essentially a negotiation is the important thing to understand.
So you should always do that. Even if you're brand new and it's your first job offer, you should do the research and come back. Yeah.
Always. Yeah. Just there will always be a band of the salary, of the options, or something that they're flexible on. And like their incentive as a company is to get you at the lowest cost. Like just as you as a consumer, your incentive is to get something that costs the least amount of money. So it's on you to make yourself worth more. But I think I've used, it's all great to just talk about this, like, yeah, always negotiate. But I think people kind of freeze up when they have to actually do it, and how to phrase it in a way that makes sense and that makes them feel comfortable, and that also like, gets the result that they want. So I've used and I've advised people this YouTube video that we can also link in the show notes, that's titled "How to Double Your Salary with 5 Simple Steps." It sounds corny, but it's extremely effective. And I've used it before, and I can verify very effective.
I think one of the things that keeps people away from negotiation is that sense of desperatism, that they are desperate to get the job. Sometimes they're coming from a stance of being unemployed. Sometimes they're coming from a stance of being at their first job. And they're afraid that negotiation may, in fact, cause the offerer to pull the job.
I think that's never going to happen. Like if you negotiate, like if they've offered you the job for a certain amount, they're not going to rescind the offer because of your negotiation. They'll come back with what they're comfortable with, but they will not just say like, oh, sorry, no, because you said this, we won't hire you now, because they spent a lot of time and money and resources on getting you hired. Mm-hmm. So they want to not do that again. That's their motivation. It costs a lot of money to hire people, and it decreases productivity of the rest of the team. So they want to make hires quickly. So that's something you need to remember. It's in their best interest to hire people as fast as possible.
And it's a really good point, because for as unpleasant as it is to go through these 5 stages of the interview process and just like, yuck, what a rough go to get that job. But it's also yuck on the hiring end. That's like, oh my God, we've got the team tied up in interviews, mm-hmm. and we need somebody, like, we need to stop doing this interviewing and just get somebody working, so there's big incentive on their part.
I think you pointed out a really great thing, actually, that we haven't talked about, the fact that at the interview, people want you to succeed because they don't want to keep on interviewing. Like, the interviewers are not there to make sure you fail. So keep that in mind. Like, you're there and they want to get you. They want to make sure that you succeed. So they're not out there to get you.
Can I put a caveat on that I'd say that's closer to 90-95% than everybody? Because I've entered into interviews where I've had an interviewer who is very obviously along the lines of, I expect this person to fail.
Okay. There's always exceptions to the rule. Yeah.
Yeah. I had somebody ask me how to write malloc on an interview. And I was like, why would I want to? It's been done very, very well.
Yeah. Well, and that's part of what you're doing in the interview process too. It's like, if you meet potential team members and your potential manager and the vibe is just like, then
run.
Then I guess you use that as a great practice experience.
Yeah.
Exactly. And like the other thing to remember is also that, it might feel like you're the one being interviewed all the time, but you need to remember that you're also interviewing them. You're also trying to evaluate if you want to work at this company, if these are the people that you'd be comfortable working with, happy working with day in, day out. So I think it is very empowering to keep that in mind and remember that as you go into an interview.
Okay.
Is there other stuff, do you guys think, that you can do, that stuff you can tell yourself to bolster, to help you be brave, to help you survive the emotions of the process? Like we're saying it's not really going to be start on the advice from this podcast now, have a job by dinner. It's going to be a longer haul. How do you, it could be a month and a half, it could be 3 months, it could be 6 months till you get that one, the job you really want. How do you keep your spirits up? How do you survive this? Jeff, what do you think?
Yeah, that's a good one. I think a lot of it depends on your kind of your individual circumstances and the way you approach things in life in general, probably. But it absolutely can get to be extremely draining because it's really mentally taxing. You're also spending a ton of time, like especially, let's say you're working at the same time where you're looking for a job. You're essentially working two jobs then, depending on how aggressive you are in the job search. And then if you're unemployed, there's a whole lot of extra pressure there potentially for financial reasons. So it's a little hard to tell people not to sweat it, because it's hard not to. But I think one thing to keep in mind is, there's definitely there are a lot of opportunities out there, and if the one you're pursuing at that point in time doesn't work out, it's like you said, Susannah, that it's good practice if nothing else, because you're getting it's pretty much the ultimate practice, because like Leah said, doing mock interviews is super important, because it's this whole skill where you have to be able to verbalize your thoughts in a specific way and under this particular type of pressure in a performative way. And then also maybe doing some things you don't do in your day-to-day job necessarily, like you're writing a bunch of just really convoluted algorithms maybe versus some of the stuff you might be doing day to day. And so I think if you can at least look at those opportunities that fall through as that was awesome practice, because it not only gave you tons of face time doing mock interviews that were real interviews, but it also drove you to do all the prep for that. And most likely you not only sat through, let's say, 5 or 6 hours of interviews for this particular company, but you also spent like 40 hours cramming, practicing with something like Leet Code or doing some mock interviews and getting fresh, right? So that the next interview, the next company you find, you're going to be in a better position for that. Like even if you take it away, like your ego might be a little bruised, but you have to. I think the other point is, I think even if you feel like you did bad on something, a lot of times they're going to give you problems that are impossible to solve in like a half an hour, right? But what they want to see is how you deal with it, how you verbalize things, and they want to see how you think and how you work with someone, right? And so as long as you're demonstrating that, you're probably successful, but you still might not get the job, because reality is, depending on what you're looking at, there could be dozens of other candidates, and maybe it just happened to be someone, you might have been awesome, you might have performed really well, but that person had like some extremely relevant experience. Like 2 years ago, they worked at a company very similar to that, and might have had some great ideas on ways to approach things. So I think that's the other big thing, is just not to beat yourself up too much about the missed opportunities, at least from a like personal standpoint, because there is so much out of your control that you do not have any visibility into. So I think like you just want to focus on the takeaway that you got some great experience, and that you can turn that into something positive to prep for the next one.
And in many cases, you can actually ask the interviewer, "Can you give me any advice?" Or was
Uh,
there something that didn't quite stand out that would help me in the future? And many interviewers will be happy to turn that around and give you advice back.
That's true, and I think you hit the way you phrase that. I want to point it out because the speaking to the individual interviewers, you probably are going to get some feedback. But if you wait until the end of the process and you get like a rejection from a recruiter, and you say, "Hey, can you give me some feedback on like how I can improve?" They're not going to tell you anything because typically they're a little concerned. A lot of it's like legal concerns. They don't want to get sued for discrimination or some other reason. So yeah, the connection with those interviewers is a huge thing. Like in the moment when you're in the interview.
I would build on that and say, if yeah, exactly. If you can do this, if you can ask, like at the end of the interview, you'll have like 5 minutes to ask questions. That's where you ask this question. Because if you're going to ask it in a follow-up email, they're not going to answer it most likely. So ask it right there and then and kind of catch them by surprise.
While
Great
we're at it,
advice, you guys.
we're talking about careers and career strategy, and we mentioned journey way early on. Let's pull back on that one. Leah, can you talk about journey?
Yeah, certainly. So, yeah, I am now the CEO of a company called Journey. We're just in the middle of our angel raise, and our mission is to make career coaching more affordable and accessible and scalable, and help people find more clarity and confidence in their career strategy and have better conversations with their managers. So it really kind of all started because of my experience with switching roles. So I started off as an iOS engineer. I moved into product, and then I wasn't quite sure if I should go back to engineering to product. So I switched a couple of times throughout the next couple of years. And that was because my first role in product was I didn't really have a lot of support essentially when I switched, and I
Mm.
suddenly had this big team I had to lead, and no one to help guide me. And with engineering, there's a lot of communication and feedback you get on your work all the time because people are reviewing your code and pull requests, and you're talking, you're pairing, and suddenly I was just alone. So I had a lot of anxiety and imposter syndrome on how to navigate this new career path. And I ended up getting a career coach. I was super skeptical about it, but we got together for 3 months, and she really helped me get that clarity and confidence in how to take my career to the next level, what are my next steps, and to really be like to own it essentially. But I paid $4,000 for that, which is an insane amount of money. And at that point, I was thinking to myself, there are so many people in my network because I was spending time mentoring people, younger people in their careers that could benefit so much out of this. But career coaching is so like reserved for the individuals at the top, the like, exec level people, right? So what can we do to bring that down, to bring that to all the levels, right? Because everyone, I believe, deserves a coach. So yeah, we created, with my like ed tech experience, really kind of took the top career coaches that we identified and top materials that exist out there, and put it into a learning course that is getting delivered on Slack in bite-sized information. So each day you'll get a little bit of knowledge and an activity over Slack, and then you'll complete it. We currently have one course called Find Your Way to Work. It takes you through 7 modules, takes about 3 months to complete. And yeah, people are really enjoying it so far with the early 30 users we have on the platform.
That sounds really cool. Okay, so for everybody listening who's like, "Ooh, I want to get those Slack messages," how do they do it?
Yeah, you can sign up to our waitlist. It's on jrny.space. So if you visit our website and just put your email in, we'll let you know once we are ready to onboard more people.
And we'll include that in the show notes.
Yeah.
And now you said, okay, when you did this, when you jumped past the skepticism and went for hiring a career coach, you spent $4,000 on it.
Yeah.
So what can people expect to spend on Journey?
So Journey is obviously trying to get all of this good stuff at a much lower price point. So currently we're still in like an iterative process. So we are charging £19 per month. I think that ends up being around $25 a month. So if you complete the program in 3 months, that takes about $75 for the whole thing. Yeah.
That's definitely better than 4,000.
Yeah, that's really cool.
So one of the things that I find is a wonderful escape from all of this is I want to lift both of your hands off the keyboards and find out, what do you do when you're not actually interviewing, teching, programming, etc.? Leah, you got this bright smile and you actually lifted your hands up. So what are your diversions when you're not actually programming?
Well, I think one of my favorite diversions right now is being able to finally travel. And since I'm based in London, it's quite easy and simple to travel all around Europe. So my partner and I have been visiting like different countries over the weekend. So we just recently returned from Copenhagen, and we were in Slovenia a little bit before that. So that's currently my favorite diversion. But I also do a lot of sporty activities like play squash and rock climb. So those are some things I really like to kind of like, get tangible with things that I do rather than just like computer screen typey.
And Leah, where are you originally from?
I'm originally from Slovenia.
Wonderful. Jeff, how about you? What do you do when you're not attached to the keyboard? Or I'm assuming that family is going to be one of those higher ranked ones.
Yeah, I was gonna say, whenever I hear someone without kids talking about their free time, I'm kind of like drift away wistfully, and my brain goes into protection mode. But
Jeff, you'll get there. It comes back around. It really does.
They turn 18. They really do.
But yeah, I guess that'll happen. But yeah, I do try to enjoy the time I have with them while they still like will put up with me, right? So I do spend a lot of time with my kids that I enjoy. So we they're old enough now that we can like play some video games together and just kind of do some things other than like tea parties that maybe I'm a little more invested in. So the other thing we do kind of as a family is we like to go like hiking, and I live in Texas now. And so we've been here a few years now, but I guess we're still like exploring different areas. Texas is quite large. And so we'll go on like just, a few nights stay at like an Airbnb somewhere in just different locations to go check a place out, just usually in the middle of nowhere where we can just go around like on a few acres and like, or near a state park and just go hiking and that kind of thing. So enjoy that. And then my other passion, which I haven't been able to do a ton lately, was I used to, when I lived in the Chicago area, I would fly out to Orlando and drive to Cape Canaveral and watch, at the time, a lot of space shuttle launches. I did see a few SpaceX launches out of there as well. And then I'm looking forward to some launches out of Boca Chica, which is Starbase. So where SpaceX is working on, launching their Starship. And so I was able to go there in like a few months ago. It's near the beach. It's near the coast. So we went to the beach. We stopped by to visit, and I was surprised to see that like you can just pull up right in front of there, and like they'll just wave to you. You can walk in. I got like within maybe 50 feet of the two starships off in the distance. So that was really neat, and I'm looking forward to potentially even like a month or two from now, they may finally have some clearance to launch. And so I'll be making like a quick 5 hour trek to Boca Chica to watch a launch.
Oh,
That's
that's really
amazing.
cool.
Yes.
And don't worry about the kids. It gets easier. I mean, my beard looked just like yours 2 years ago.
Nice.
Yeah, I like telling people I'm only 23, depending on what numeration system you count by.
Nice.
All right. Is there any other topics that we haven't hit that you would like to hit upon?
Do we want to say something about the upcoming video course, Leia?
Yeah, why not? Let's do it. It's moving slowly, so I would actually also want to include like an invite to people if they want to participate, if they're listening.
But yeah, tell us about this.
Let's back up. Why don't you toss into that a little fresher? Susannah, why don't you just say, well, now I know that this is coming up. That way we actually, yeah.
I recall that we have some content coming up, a video course here at raywunderlich.com that's going to very directly help people with these 5 different kinds of interviews and succeeding at these interviews. And Leia, you're the lead on that. You're the main presenter or the developer. Tell us what will people get to do and learn and win?
Yeah, absolutely. So we've been developing this project for a little bit, where we want to, it's all well and good to talk about how to interview, but where you really understand how to do it is when you can actually see how the whole thing proceeds, especially for people who have never interviewed, to kind of get a good feeling of it, how to behave, how the interviewer behaves, and then understand like what went well and what didn't go so well in that interview. So we have an exciting new video course coming up, where we will do just that. We'll have an interviewer and an interviewee. They'll have a question, and they'll talk through that as it was a real interview. At the end, they'll discuss like what went well, what could be improved. And we currently have 3 of those videos recorded with some amazing people. And we plan to have it launch sometime in April.
Wow.
And for the first season. But this hopefully will be a continuous video course, so it won't end. So the idea is that we can keep on adding more to this library of content, based on different questions and all of the different phases. And that can be an amazing resource for people who are trying to find a job. So if anyone is interested in participating, we are really excited to have you join us. So please use one of the links in the show notes, to make sure that we know that you're interested.
That sounds great.
Fantastic.
And I love the idea that it's not just a one shot of recording these and then we're done, because that gives people the opportunity after they've watched through what exists already to say, oh, I really wish you'd covered this thing, or I did this thing in an interview and I know it could have gone better, but like, how could you help me with that? So
exactly. I think that's, like as we learn more about what people like and don't like about this, there's a lot of different opportunities of going into directions of maybe we'll take audience questions, or maybe we'll like implement like how you would behave if X happened to you. So I think those are all great ways to kind of move with the content.
Yeah, that's exciting.
Wonderful. Leah and Jeff, I cannot thank you both enough for joining us on the show. And I know that it's scheduling to get everybody on the same time at the same place is very difficult when we're cut across 4 different time zones here. I really, really appreciate your time. Thank you for both coming on the show.
This was really fun.
You can find Leah on Twitter at Hello Sonnenschein. That's HelloSunschein. Jeff is Jeff Rames on Twitter. Susannah is Sus Gupta. And I am Podcast Drew. Coming up in our next episode in about 2 weeks, Brian Kafitz will bring us up to speed on what we should know about Flutter today and how and where we can learn a little bit more. 2 weeks after that, Renan Diaz will be joining us to talk about the upcoming book, Real World iOS by Tutorials. And if you have any questions for Renan, you can email him or us at podcast@raywenderlich.com, and we'll make sure to bring those questions up during the podcast. In the meantime, that is it for the show. I thank Jeff and Leah one more time. I could not do the show without Susannah Skyer Gupta, who helps me in the background and in the foreground every episode. I am Podcast Drew. We send things back to the Emerald Castle. Ray, back to you.
And that's a wrap. Thanks again, everybody, for listening to the RayWenderlich.com podcast. We hope you enjoyed it, and don't forget to leave a rating on iTunes. See you next time.